Hello, in this video we will be discussing about Vimshottari Dasha. Now what does Dasha mean? We have discussed about the 9 planets and the 12 zodiac signs, and as we know that the 9 planets keep moving in the 12 zodiac signs, and there is a time at the time of birth where once you draw your birth chart, you will see what planets are situated in what zodiac signs. And then after it is determined what planets are sitting in what zodiac signs in your Vedic birth chart at the time of your birth, we then go ahead and figure out the dasha, which means that the major period of that planet. Now, as per Vedic astrology, the 9 planets have been allocated periods in terms of their influence in the number of years, and during those periods the power of those planets get activated. So based on whether that particular planet is auspicious or inauspicious in your birth chart, the influence will be there of that particular planet on that individual during its period or dasha. Now, according to sage Parashara, he came up with several dasha systems, meaning he came up with a dasha system which explains as to what or how long the influence of the particular planet or out of the 9 planets will be. And there are several systems as prescribed by the sages. And as a matter of fact, sage Parashara has mentioned 42 systems of finding out the dashas or that period of influence of that particular planet out of the 9 planets which we are talking about. The 9 planets being Ketu, Venus, Sun, Moon, Mars, Rahu, Jupiter, Saturn, and Mercury. We've already discussed about these planets in detail in our earlier videos. So going back to the dasha system, sage Parashara has mentioned 42 dasha systems, and again meaning which that dasha explains the time period where that particular planet gets activated and it influences that individual. However, out of the 42 ways of determining the dasha or the period of that planet, the most common and the most followed, I can say, is the Vimshottari Dasha system. And the assumption of the Vimshottari Dasha system is that the maximum lifespan of an individual is 120 years. And the 9 planets have been allocated a certain number of years which add up to this 120 years. So how is it allocated? It is allocated as follows. Ketu has been given a period of 7 years. So Ketu will have an influence of 7 years if it comes as a dasha or as a period in a person's lifespan, which we've already discussed is a maximum of 120 years. Venus has been allocated an influence or a dasha of 20 years. Sun as a planet has been allocated an influence of 6 years or the dasha of 6 years. Moon as a planet has been allocated a dasha of 10 years. Mars has been allocated a dasha of 7 years. Rahu has been allocated a dasha of 18 years. Saturn has been allocated a dasha of 19 years. Mercury has been allocated a dasha of 17 years, and Jupiter has been allocated a dasha of 16 years. So if you add these 9 planets dashas, or the number of years where they influence the human or that individual within their dasha period, the total comes to 120 years, which means that number of years allocated to Ketu is 7 and Venus is 20, so on and so forth. If you add all of them, it'll come to 120 years. So this is the basis of the Vimshottari Dasha, which is very commonly followed in a Vedic astrological chart. Now, how do we determine, the question comes now, that how do we determine which planet is going to be influencing that particular individual in its period when a person is born? So how it is calculated is that there are 27 nakshatras. So we'll have to understand first what a nakshatra is. A nakshatra is nothing but it is a lunar mansion in Vedic astrology. And there are 27 nakshatras in all. So the moon moves in each of these nakshatras, or each of these 27 nakshatras. And the number of degrees which is allocated to these 27 nakshatras are 13 degrees and 20 minutes. So if you multiply 13 degrees and 20 minutes, it'll be approximately 360 degrees. So the moon will move in these nakshatras and complete 360 degrees approximately. And each of the 9 planets which we've discussed, which are Ketu, Venus, Sun, Moon, Mars, Rahu, Jupiter, Saturn, and Mercury in that order, will rule over 3 nakshatras. And these 3 nakshatras are out of the 27 nakshatras. So 9 times 3 equals 27, which means that one particular planet is going to rule over 3 nakshatras. And which of these 3 nakshatras? Basically, these 3 nakshatras are the 3 nakshatras which are situated at a trine from each other. So this, we have to understand that there are 27 nakshatras, and each nakshatra has a degree of 13 degrees and 20 minutes, and which adds up to approximately 360 degrees. And the 9 planets rule over 3 nakshatras each, which means that the 27 nakshatra in all are ruled by 9 planets. And the names of those nakshatras start from Ashwini to Revati. There are 27 nakshatras, and the nakshatras, we can discuss about those nakshatras because we don't want to go through all these 27 nakshatra in this video, but you can very easily find out what are those 27 nakshatras and what particular planet rules over these nakshatras. So for example, just to give you an example, Ketu, whose dasha or mahadasha as it is called, of 7 years, which we have discussed, rules over 3 nakshatras, and those 3 nakshatras which are situated at a trine from each other are Ashwini, Magha, and Mula. Similarly, Venus, whose mahadasha is 20 years, or dasha is 20 years based on the Vimshottari Dasha which we are talking about, rules over 3 nakshatras: Bharani, Purva Falguni, and Purva Ashara. Similarly, Sun, whose Mahadasha is 6 years, as we've already discussed earlier, rules over 3 nakshatras: Kritika, Uttara Falguni, and Uttara Ashara. Similarly, Moon, whose main period or Mahadasha is 10 years as per the Vimshottari, rules over 3 nakshatras: Rohini, Hasta, and Shravana. Mars, whose Mahadasha is 7 years, rules over Mrigashara, Chitra, and Dhanishta. Rahu, whose Mahadasha is 18 years, rules over Ardra, Swati, and Shatabhishak. Jupiter, whose main period or Mahadasha is 16 years as per the Vimshottari Dasha system, as we have discussed earlier, rules over 3 nakshatras, namely Punarvasu, Vishakha, and Purva Bhadra. Saturn, whose main period is 19 years, as per the Vimshottari Dasha, as we have discussed earlier, rules over 3 nakshatras, which are Pushya, Anuradha, and Uttara Bhadra. Mercury, whose main period or Mahadasha is 17 years, rules over 3 nakshatra: Ashlesha, Jyeshtha, and Revati. So these 9 planets times 3 nakshatras makes it 27 nakshatras. So how do we determine when a person is born? How do we determine what period or what dasha he is under, meaning which planet is going to be influencing his present period when he is born? And this is how it is calculated. The starting dasha or mahadasha at the time of birth will be of the lord of that nakshatra where moon is situated. So first we'll see what nakshatra is moon is situated, and we've already discussed the rulership of those nakshatra, and we will see which planet rules that nakshatra, and we will exactly know that the starting period of that person commencing from his birth is going to be ruled by that particular planet, over which that particular planet has a rulership of that nakshatra of. So for example, if moon is placed in Mrigasara, just to give you an example, if moon is placed in Mrigasara, then we know that the period will be that of Mars. Why? Because we know that Mars rules over the nakshatra of Mrigasara. Now, we also know that the Mars has been given a Mahadasha, or the period of 7 years, but we will not calculate the entire 7 years at the beginning of his birth, meaning which from the time he was born. So we will not calculate 7 years of that entire Mars Mahadasha. We will calculate it based on how far advanced the moon has gone in that particular nakshatra, and based on that distance already covered by moon in that particular nakshatra, the balance period of that dasha will be of that particular planet. So for example, we are discussing this example of if the moon is in Mrigasara, the first dasha will be of Mars, but we will not calculate the entire 7 years commencing from his time of birth. We will calculate how far moon has already advanced in Mrigasara. Say for example, it has advanced half, meaning which because 13 degree and 20 minutes is the total distance. If it has covered half of that 13 degrees and 20 minutes, then the balance half will be the dasha of Mars starting from the time of that person's birth. So it will not be 7 years, which is the total time of Mars, but it will be the balance of 50% of 7 years, which will be 3.5 years. Similarly, Mahadasha also is further divided into a sub-period or Antardasha. And the Antardasha is also further divided into a sub-period or Pratyantardasha. So just like we have calculated the period from the time of birth based on how much moon has advanced in that particular nakshatra, we will prorate the same as per the sub period, meaning the Antardasha, and further sub period meaning the Antardasha, and further sub period meaning the Pratyantardasha. So these two dashas, the main dasha, of course, we calculated how much the moon has advanced. Then the sub period will be also prorated accordingly, and the sub period is also going to be prorated accordingly. And we've already discussed sub period is called Antardasha, sub period is called Pratyantardasha, and the main period, of course, we've discussed is the Mahadasha. So I hope I've made myself clear. I know that you'll have to study a little bit to get a feel of what this exactly means, but the basis of the calculation is very simple, that there are 9 planets, there are 12 zodiac signs, there is a period system. Sage Parashara has determined 42 types of period systems or dasha systems, out of which the most common is the Vimshottari Dasha system, and Vimshottari Dasha system compromises of 120 years, and those 120 years are Ketu, Venus, Sun, Moon, Mars, Rahu, Jupiter, Saturn, and Mercury, in that order. And those periods of Mahadasha, or the main period, are 7 years, 20 years, 6 years, 10 years, 7 years, 18 years, 16 years, 19 years, and 17 years respectively, in that order. And how do we determine when a person is born, what dasha or the main dasha he is in? We have to go to the nakshatras, and we have already discussed there are 27 nakshatras which are ruled by 9 planets, and each individual planet rules over 3 nakshatras. So what we'll do is we'll see which nakshatra the moon is placed at the time of birth, and then we'll see what is the ruler of that nakshatra, and that will determine what will be the planetary period or Mahadasha of the person at the time of birth, and how much is left will be determined by how much moon has advanced in that particular nakshatra. And similarly, the sub period and the sub periods will also be prorated based on that. So I hope I've made myself clear here as much as I could in this little video. And once you start to do chart readings, first you'll see the placement of the planets on that particular birth chart. You'll see the zodiac signs, and then the dasha system or the Vimshottari Dasha system will make you understand as to what what planet is influencing that particular individual based on his birth chart in various periods of his life. And we have to remember that the order does not change. So for example, if at the time of birth the Mahadasha or the main period is Ketu, the next period has to be Venus, the next period has to be Sun, the next period has to be Moon, the next period has to be Mars, the next period has to be Jupiter. I'm sorry, after Mars it is Rahu, and then the next period after Rahu has to be Jupiter. After Jupiter it has to be Saturn. After Saturn it has to be Mercury. So it has to follow the order, and it has to follow the principle of the number of years allocated to that particular planet based on that Vimshottari Dasha system, and that is as per Sage Parashara. So hopefully you will go and practice and see based on this video as to how you can understand the Vimshottari Dasha system, and then you can determine what planets are influencing that particular at what point of that individual's life, and you can make a determination based on that. Thank you.